Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in today's first video. We're going to have a look at the weather next week to 10 days. In today's first video, this takes us more or less to the end of November. Later on today, we'll have Jan May Friday. As always on a Friday, we'll have a look at the weather for the month ahead with the long-range Japanese and CFS tomorrow. But I wanted to bring you this update first of all, because overnight the model runs have more or less converged in terms of what's happening next week. You'll know that for around a couple of weeks we have had a lot of disagreement between model output, and particularly in the last week we have had loads of chopping and changing between the two main models, the GFS and the ECM WF. So overnight model runs have come into line with one another more or less, still a bit different, but more or less they are in line, and it looks as though we're raising the white flag on the chance of cold weather next week, or at least notably cold weather. The GFS is now going exceptionally mild and stormy next week. The ECMWF doesn't go quite that far, and it does appear to be the ECMWF that's driving things at the moment in terms of the weather that we're getting. The GFS has been chopping and changing so much over recent days and swinging wildly from one way to another. So it could be a GFS going a bit over the top with this exceptionally mild, wet and stormy spell that it's seeing next week now. In complete contrast to what it was showing just around 24 hours ago. The ECMWF doesn't go as far as that, but overall both models are keeping winds off the Atlantic through the course of next week, so we don't tap into the very cold Arctic air that it looked as though a few days ago we would probably get this Arctic air from a big blocking feature that will be setting up over the Arctic. So I'll tell you for everything that's going on right now. We have the 500 millibar high anomaly flowcharts from the PSU website here. We've got the ECMWF here on the top, the GFS, I'll go in a moment. So on the bottom, 500 millibars. 80,000 feet is an area in the absolute high pressure and low pressure are being moved around by a jet stream running above. Blue extrapolates to low pressure, red to high pressure. These take us to the end of November, more or less, around the 27th of the month. So this is our large blocking feature over the pole. This is what's been causing all of the problems recently. We've got this large area of high pressure centering itself right over the top of the North Pole and extending it down in towards Greenland as well. Now, a few days ago, that looked as though it would probably deliver us a very cold and wintry end to November. But adjustments have been going on within the model output over recent days, and those adjustments have gradually been limiting the potential of this blocking feature so that now it doesn't get itself into position to deliver us cold conditions. What actually happens is that we've got a deep trough here across northeastern parts of America, so it looks like the cold air is going down onto the eastern side of the states. Again, how many times have we seen this over the past 5 years or so? And also we've got some of the cold with this trough just here going down into Russia and possibly into parts of Asia as well. But for us, well, we have this ridge building through Central Europe. Just here we've got high pressure through Central Europe and down into the Mediterranean, which leaves us on the mild side of blocking and on the mild side of the jet stream and the trough of low pressure. So with the jet stream we are doing something like that, very deep trough across the eastern parts of America, of course. Then we bring the jet across the Atlantic, almost goes to our south, but then look, it's pushing northwards, and actually we are dragging up the air from a long way south there. Actually, we're bringing the air up from the Azores in that sort of direction. It's all because of this ridge across central parts of Europe. The GFS, as I say, that's going very stormy now. So the trough is much deeper in the Atlantic with the GFS in the 7 to 10 day time frame, really deep blue colours. There's that large ridge extending through much of Central and Southern Europe as well. So what that does is as deep with the trough into eastern parts of America. There is still some of the cold air going down into the eastern states, but what it does for us is that have a strong jet stream coming across the Atlantic, then the jet pushes northwards like that, and it leaves us mild. We're dragging up the air from a long way south, and with this trough in the Atlantic also potentially very wet and very stormy. Again, the GFS, it does have that blocking, it's still there. So you'll probably be thinking that the sort of blocking the negative Arctic oscillations that we've been seeing in the AO index over recent days was wrong. It wasn't wrong. It is right. There is going to be blocking next week. There is going to be high pressure over the Arctic and into Greenland as well. But as I always say, having blocking over the pole is only one part of the story. Where the blocking is sitting and how it interacts with the jet stream and everything else is always the critical factor. So the blocking will be there, but we won't be in a position to get any cold air coming down from it. So these are the GFS temperature and precipitation anomalies for the next couple of weeks. This is for London. You can see what's happened overnight. The red line here is the 30-year upper air temperature average, starting off quite cold at the moment. If you like cold weather, make the most of the weekend, because next week, look, the temperatures are sort of soaring up. It's becoming not just very mild, but potentially very warm there for the time of year anyway, with temperatures going close to 10 Celsius at 850 HPA. And those very mild, if not warm, temperatures continue through most of next week as well. Right at the very end, towards the end of November, start of December, there is a decline in the temperatures. A few cold outliers are appearing, but I think the least said about that, the better, really. In terms of next week, we've lost the cold outliers that we saw within the GFS ensembles yesterday. They were outliers anyway, but essentially the model has very much shifted towards very mild, if not warm, conditions next week, and also quite a lot of rain as well. Although the precipitation part of the ensemble isn't too overly dramatic. Remember, this is for London. If we look at somewhere further northwest, probably would be wetter than this. But it isn't too wet down in the south through the course of next week, although later on there is an increasingly wet trend. But let's have a look at somewhere exposed to those westerly winds like Manchester and there. We do see signs of wetter conditions coming through next week. But the main thing is actually, rather than the rainfall, the push up in the temperature that the model is now going for. That is hugely different to what it was seeing a few days ago, and it is going for very mild weather through the course of next week indeed. Temperature anomalies now are coming out very mild for next week. This is from the 17th to 25th of November. Most parts of Europe are mild on average. Scandinavia, particularly Norway, colder than average there. But as these long fetched southwesterly winds push in, if they do, then even sort of Scandinavia may see the temperatures going very mild on these anomaly charts in the coming days. Most parts of Europe are warmer than average, from Ireland and Portugal in the west over towards Russia in the east. Precipitation anomalies look like this. Still drier than average, so again, it's not overly dramatic in terms of rainfall yet, but the signs are a little bit ominous from the GFS. I'll show you that in a moment. Temperature anomalies for the south, precipitation anomalies I should say, for the south coming out drier than average. Northern areas are coming out a little bit wetter than average. Here is the GFS for Tuesday, and we're beginning to pull up those mild southwest winds. Will probably be quite a cold start to next week, but by Tuesday the milder winds are starting to push up from the southwest. If you follow the isobars back, the air is originating from quite a long way south, somewhere like the Canary Islands, and that is beginning to head up towards us. Notice there is a very large blocking ridge over Greenland, so as I say, the charts weren't wrong that were forecasting blocking. They were just wrong about where that blocking would impact with its colder push of winds. By the time we go through to Wednesday, so increasingly we're getting influence from the southwest, with these southwest winds wafting up very mild air from the country. Notice low pressure is gathering out in the Atlantic as well. Lots of low pressure developing around there. And as we push through into second half next week, so it turns increasingly unsettled. Tight backed ice bars starting to come in. These are gale force winds potentially, and bouts of heavy rain moving through as well. We're running up towards day 10 now. Very unsettled indeed. That's how we finish up on day 10, which is Monday, 27th of November. And it's very, very mild indeed by that point. The wind is coming from a really long way to the southwest. We've got all of this ridging across much of Europe. Heights are still high here around southern and central parts of Europe. We've got the low pressure in the excuse me, in the Atlantic, and dragging up those long fetch southwesterly winds. That's kind of like what we had during December 2015 all month, which was exceptionally warm December. Not saying it's going to last as long as that, but certainly it looks like we could well be ending November on a very mild note if the GFS is right. It might be going a little bit over the top. This is how the ECMWF is seeing things. So Tuesday, we're still relatively cold actually with the ECM on Tuesday. Still have this extension down from the north. That's the blocking feature, of course, that has had a really good go at bringing cold edges. Most parts of Europe also cold by Tuesday. We go through to Wednesday, and here comes the low pressure with those southwesterly winds. So it delays bringing those southwesterly winds and the low pressure in a little bit, but by Wednesday, it is starting to trend in the same direction as the GFS. So that by Thursday we're into a very unsettled spell of weather. Again, we're not quite dragging the air up from the tropics such as we are with the GFS. So the ECM over the last few days, it's interesting because the ECM over the last few days has been the warmer of the two. The GFS has generally been colder. Now the GFS has swung right to the other extreme, and it's very warm, whereas the ECMWF isn't as warm actually. Of the two, the ECM this morning is the colder of the two, and this is bringing the air around this deep area of low pressure. It's a very deep area of low pressure at 970 millibars. It's bringing the air from sort of the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean, so not overly cold, but it is a little bit cooler compared to the GFS. But essentially both of the models are in agreement, which is through next week. We're still, particularly for England and Wales, dragging up the air from the Atlantic, so it's relatively mild, and it also looks quite unsettled with these areas of low pressure around the country as well. Heading up towards day 10, you'll notice we're staying unsettled, but we still keep relatively high heights towards Greenland, extending back into the Arctic. Actually, by Sunday 26th of November, ECM is pulling down a little bit of a northerly there as that low pressure is clear. So definitely out of the two, the ECMWF this morning is the cooler of the two, despite over the past few days, actually the ECMWF has been the mildest of the two. We finish up on day 10, looking like this, and it's a very messy looking picture, but essentially we're still bringing the air in from off the Atlantic, got low pressure down to our southwest. I suspect if we could run on another 24 hours, that would head in that sort of direction. But again, notice heights are relatively high still over Greenland, and it's heading up towards the Arctic. So out of the two, the GFS is the most stormy, and it's also the most zonal and the most mild, gone completely from one extreme to another since yesterday morning, whereas the ECMWF is more toned down, and it's just going kind of like what it has been going all the way along, really, which is not overly cold conditions next week, rather unsettled, and at times quite mild, but not the exceptional warmth that we see with the GFS. Out of the two, I'd probably go with the ECM. I think the GFS may be a little bit over the top with this stormy zonal weather that it's going for, and the ECMWF has generally been, as I say, the most consistent of the two. It hasn't been swinging around as wildly as the GFS has been doing. Finally, just to leave you with what's happening in the stratosphere. So this is temperature at 30 HPA over the North Pole. The grey line here is the trend line. Time here, the black line tells you where we are with the temperature, where we've been through the season back to September, and where we are right now with the temperature at 30 HPA. And we are cold now. We're very cold in the stratospheric, with the stratospheric temperatures over the North Pole. Now, when this temperature at 30 HPA or even above it at 10 HPA goes cold, such as we're seeing here, it tends to go along with increase in the polar vortex. So the polar vortex is kind of the engine that's driving the westerlies across the Northern Hemisphere, particularly through the Atlantic and into Europe. So a cold stratosphere over the Arctic is one of the things that tends to go along with stronger westerly winds, an enhanced zonal flow, and bouts of heavy rain. If there's one thing that's gone wrong with this cold spell that might have been setting up the next week, it may well be the cold stratosphere, which is going to increase the jet stream and also increase the zonal flow. I can show you the GFS temperature forecast for the stratosphere over North Pole through to the end of November and the start of December. This is these are the cold temperatures we've got at 10 HPA over the North Pole on the 25th of November. Just run through and you can see that we're going to keep it pretty cold over the pole, though we do try to bring something a little bit warmer in from sort of the Pacific side of the pole as we go through into the start of December. That's a little bit of a warming, but it is pretty minor. I don't think it would have much impact on the stratosphere, on the cold stratosphere at this stage. But it is a bit of a warming that it's seeing there at 10 HPA, but I don't think it would do anything really to weaken the stratosphere and weaken the polar vortex. We may well be going into a sustained zonal spell as we get through into the start of December. The last time you had stratospheric temperatures as cold as this at 30 HPA at the end of November was probably back in November 2013, and you'll remember that took us into an extraordinarily wet, very mild and stormy winter for 2013-2014. Now, hopefully we won't see anything as extreme as that, but it's a bit ominous that the temperatures are continuing to go cold, increasingly cold at in the stratosphere at 30 HPA over North Pole at the moment. We may well see a strengthening of the polar vortex for the end of November and into the start of December. So it all looks a bit grim for anybody that wants cold weather. We are going to have a fairly chilly weekend, so make the most of that if you do like seasonably feeling weather for the end of November. Next week, I think we're trending increasingly unsettled, and also, if we believe the GFS, turning exceptionally mild. But I say the ECM is toned that down. It isn't going as mild as the GFS. So still disagreements there in terms of the exact detail. But the weather looks Atlantic driven. It certainly doesn't look like we're going to get locked into that really cold and wintry spell that looked to be on the cards a few days ago. So another, how often do we say this these days, another failed UK cold spell. Looks like we've been led up the garden path again. And I suppose we're just going to wait for our next opportunity to get some sort of blocking feature into place. But the story next week will probably be wet and windy, increasingly so. That's how I was doing this morning. Anyway, we'll wait and see whether there's any more twists and turns. As I say, later on today, we will have JMA Friday. That takes us through the next month. There'll be a big health warning applied with those charts, I would think, particularly in light of what's happening in terms of the uncertainty we've seen in the shorter range. If there's been so much chopping and changing from sort of 5-7 days away, then going a month out, it's always fraught danger anyway, but it will be probably even more the case, but it's fraught with danger doing that today. But we will have a look anyway at the Japanese CFS V2 miles this afternoon, see what they're showing, which will probably take us up to Christmas. Right, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.